Welcome. I'm Kristen, and this is the Simple Handmade Everyday Podcast, where I talk about living a creative, intentional life. I like to chat about quilting, knitting, what I'm reading and watching, and even a little bit about keeping a cozy, organized home. You can find me online at my blog, Simple Handmade Everyday at kristenesser.com, or on Instagram at kristenesser. I've got my cup of tea in hand, so let's settle in for a chat. Welcome to episode 9 of the podcast. I'm so happy to be here today, and I'm happy to be sitting down with you to chat for a few minutes about what's been going on around here. I've got my tea here. I again have I put the tin so I could read the right name, and now I can't see it. It's the Dragon Pearl Jasmine. It's the tea that I got for Mother's Day, and I'm still enjoying it very much. It's the perfect kind of morning tea after my 2 cups of coffee because it's green tea and a little less caffeinated. So I'm enjoying that, and I'm hoping that you are sitting down with something fun to drink as well. Welcome back for returning listeners, and welcome to anybody who's new to the podcast. I'm really honored to share this little time and space to chat with you today. As usual, life seems pretty busy right now. It's the end of May, and I've got a graduating from high school senior in 2 weeks. Jonah will graduate in 2 weeks, and I'm still sort of trying to process all that and kind of deal with all the little things that come up, the last performances and banquets and things like that, and encourage him to finally address and send out all those graduation announcements that I so sweated to get done in time. So it's all good stuff. But definitely, May, if you've got school-age kids, you know that May is just like a kick your butt month. It is the race to the finish. All the projects, all the things, all come to a head in May. And it seems to be a lot of people end school in May. Around here, we don't really get done until mid-June, which makes me a little sad. Even Chloe is not going to come home from college till mid-June, the day before Jonah graduates, so I'm grateful for that. But by then, the college kids who came home early in mid-May have snatched up all the summer jobs, so that's kind of a bummer. But so just that season of life, and I'm enjoying it, and still trying to carve out a little time to do some sewing and knitting and some self-care. So let's talk about that. Let's start out with what's on my sewing table. Actually, I have a little bit of a funny story there. Yesterday, Memorial Day, and I was, looking to spend some time in the sewing room, and I wasn't really sure. I'm waiting for a quilt to come back from the quilter. I've never gotten to say that before. I'm so excited that someone else quilted a quilt for me. I probably should have sewn up some binding. I will do that probably today. But I was looking around for something to do that would just kind of be easy and mindless. And I had a couple baby quilts from a few years ago that I started for this non-event Etsy shop I was going to open. So I pulled out one of them that I knew was like almost done. And it honestly was so bad. It was so bad. I thought, can I say this? Can I just turn this into a charity quilt? I had no heart for this quilt. So I put it in a plastic bag. And the next time I ever go to a quilt guild meeting or something like that, I'm going to drop it off on the charity table, and maybe somebody else will have the heart to finish. It's just simple patchwork, but man, I didn't know what I was doing when I laid those patches out. So I got rid of that. But in that same bag was this big panel of this children's line. And I don't even know what it's called. And I've cut the selvages off, so who knows. But it was Robert Kaufman. I know that. And it's got, I'm looking at it right now, deer and a raccoon and a ladybug and owls and it's very cute. I'll take a picture of it at some point. And it's just a big panel that kind of almost looks like it's patchwork. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do a whole cloth quilt. And I have a niece who recently had a baby boy. And so this seemed like a perfect thing to do. So I cut it about 42 by 42. And so it's just going to be a whole cloth. And I pulled a backing out of my stash, which it was backing that was earmarked for a different quilt. But I never really was 100% sure it was right for that quilt. So it's this aqua blue hashtag fabric from Riley Blake. It's very cute and, kind of neutrally. So I decided to back it with that. But then I realized when I went to do the backing that since the quilt is basically with the fabric. I don't have the width on the backing. I was hoping that I, wouldn't have to piece anything. But I didn't have enough, to really extend the sides on the extra for the back. So I had a little bit more of this panel left over, and so I just created about a 10-inch wide strip that I put, I don't know, a third of a way through on the back vertically, so that just gave me a little bit more width. And I think it's really cute, and it kind of ties the front and the back together. So I was just kind of getting going, piecing that back, when my son, the senior, came in and asked if he could use a sewing machine. What happened is his English class assigned this project, his English teacher assigned this project to take quotes from the books that they read over the course of the year and create an art project based on that. So he and a friend working together, they came up with, I guess it was 14 quotes, and every quote they kind of boiled down to a symbol, and then did a combination of going through my fabric stash for things that might represent it. Like there's, a quote, I think, about a garden or something, and, they needed something with leaves. And there's some quote about Frankenstein where he stops and he eats berries. And so I had some strawberry fabric, stuff like that. And they went to a thrift store. They found a few other things that I didn't have in my stash. For instance, a skull and something that looked like a chain link fence. I have a shortage of chain link fence fabrics in my stash, I have to admit. So anyways, so then they bought a t-shirt, or grabbed a t-shirt, and they kind of did this, they sewed all these little patches, and some of them were quite big actually, to this t-shirt. So I showed them how to use the sewing machine. And I got to say, it was hard sewing because, number one, it's knit, and that is just, it's just so stretchy. It's hard to keep things flat, but it worked out pretty well. I showed them how to use steam a seam because a lot of the fabrics they used were like another t-shirt they were trying to sew into this t-shirt. So you really need some sort of little interfacing to make that happen. And some of them, I think they just kind of fused on and didn't even sew. At one point, they sewed like a playing card onto it and a big piece of plastic. So it was quite the crazy shirt by the end. But anyways, I never thought that I would be kicked out of my own sewing room by my 18-year-old son. But so it just shows you just never know what's going to happen in life. While I was waiting for this project to come back from the quilter so that I could stitch on the binding, I've been doing quite a lot of handwork. Number one, the weather here in Southern California has been amazing. It's like low 70s all the time, it seems like. So I just want to sit outside with a cup of tea or iced tea or sparkly water or whatever. Just want to sit out in my little swingy egg chair and enjoy being outside. It will get hotter this summer, and so I know that I won't always want to be sitting out there. So I'm really trying to take advantage of being outside. So the big thing I've been working on, and I am done with now, is my visible mending project. I had told you that I got the book, Visible Mending. I'm turning around so I can see, by Jenny Wilding Carden. I have so enjoyed looking through this book and being inspired. I'll write up a whole blog post about it. So if you don't subscribe to the blog, at some point head on over there and subscribe so that you'll get notifications of those, or in Feedly or Bloglovin', whatever. But I'll have a post about that. But I pulled out a well-worn pair of capri jeans and did some stitching on the pocket. The stitching had come out of the pocket and on the bottom, and it just kind of rolled up. And you know what? I wore these jeans around the house anyways, but I didn't feel good about it. I feel like at my age, there is a fine line between being casual and frumpy, and I want to stay firmly on the side of casual and not venture into frumpy. So I sat down with it, and it was like trying to pick fabric for a quilt. I had all these scraps. I'm just like, what direction do I want to go here? I mentioned before, I thought that I was going to put like a Liberty patch. So after looking at this book, I decided I wanted to do multiple patches, not just one. So I pulled out some Liberty and some linen, and Liberty and linen are just so firmly me. But I put them on there and decided, and I used some steam-a-seam, just kind of, I didn't iron it down, just placed it, and was mulling it over, took a picture with my phone so I could try some other things, and just realized that it was very visible, a little too visible of a place on my butt. I didn't want to be attracting a lot of attention there, if you know what I mean. So went back to the sewing room, grabbed things that were blue. I have some not actual denim, but fabric, art gallery fabric that is looks like denim, but it's not really. It's softer. And I picked up this little bundle of blue fabrics. I don't know what they are. It has little plus signs on it. I think I got it at QuiltCon. So just various colors of blue, and then cut them into little patches and tried that. And that was much better. But I was still the queen of indecision here, so I didn't iron the steam-a-seam down. I didn't fuse it. And I started stitching, thinking, like, if I change my mind, then I can just take this all out. And that was not a good idea. You really need to fuse that down because they're little patches and they just pull up all over the place. And I really wasn't happy with my stitching. So I took it out, took out my stitching. I fixed all the patches, which were getting a little crumpled, and fused it down. And then decided that I needed to practice my stitching. It's called Boro stitching, Boro, which is, just kind of a running stitch, line after line of a running stitch, and decided I wanted to practice that a bit. So there was a place inside on the, like where your thighs rub, inside there, that was wearing thin. So I put a patch on the inside underneath that, and then I just did some stitching, two directions, vertically and horizontally, to just strengthen that part. And at that point, I kind of got the rhythm, kind of got into it, and it's in a much less visible spot. So when I finished that, and it really goes incredibly quickly, this kind of stitching, and it's so pleasurable to do outside and everything. Or, if it's turning to winter where you are by the fire, whichever. It's handwork is, it's so portable. So then I turned my attention back to the patches on the pocket, and I did mark them with a friction pen, roughly, so I could kind of keep them straight. And it worked out really well. The stitches are wonky. I decided not to really worry about it. And in the same way that if you have a lot of machine quilting, the denser it is, the less the mistakes show, the less the wonky stitches show. I remember seeing this thing that Angela Walters did where she was quilting something and, like, say, swirls, and then she wrote the word oops in it, with the stitching, and then quilted swirls all around it, just to show that actually when you were done and you looked at it, you had to look for the word oops because it's just texture. And that's what this was too. I did, again, stitching that was horizontal and vertical and overlapped. And so there was just kind of a lot of it going on. And that's what you see. You don't see that, oh, that stitch right there is crooked or whatever. So, like I said, I'll do a blog post, but I really enjoyed doing that. I also then was inspired to do I just did a little crosses on the other pocket, which where the stitching is kind of coming out, but the pocket isn't coming off on that one, just to kind of tie it all together. So anyways, it's really fun. And I have a pair of jeans back in the rotation that I'm now not afraid to wear out of the house. So that's been really fun. After my son and his friend got done with their project, I was able to get back into the sewing room last night, and I finished piecing that quilt back, and I basted it on my design wall about like 9 o'clock at night, which actually meant I just opened the window in the living room where I am, and I just sprayed inside the house, which I probably should not do, but it's a small quilt. And so that's already basted and ready to go, and I'm looking forward to quilting that. I want to do it very simply. I do not like to stress myself out with quilting. So I think what I'm going to do there is just some wavy organic lines. I was tempted to do my little serpentine line on my baby lock. I've got both machines out right now, but I'm itching to get back to my Juki with all the extra space and just do some pretty zen stitching and get this quilt off to my niece. I also had a little bit of extra fabric and some terry cloth in my stash, and I'm going to go ahead and make some burp rags with that too. I was really happy. I don't have a very big stash, and I always feel like when I try to go to my stash to get a fabric that I never have quite the right one. But yesterday, all the stars aligned, and I had a backing, which was amazing that I would have a backing fabric. And I even had some terry cloth from some things I sewed a few years ago. So it was just really nice to finally feel like I had what I needed in my stash. I also pulled out my hand piecing project, and I've been plugging away on that. It's been fun to get sort of re-inspired with hand piecing and think about how I want to organize things. We're going to go to the beach in the summer for about 10 days, and I definitely want to have some hand projects to go there. So I'll have some knitting probably, because at that point, Chloe will be leaving for Norway shortly after we get back. So we'll probably be panic knitting some pair of mittens or something, because I've been really uninspired to knit right now. But, so really enjoying the hand piecing. I'm continuing to mull over doing a YouTube series on hand piecing, so stay tuned for that. I'm starting to make some plans, to do with that. Knitting wise, kind of lost my knitting mojo. Still working on a pair of socks, those navy socks, and just here and there. It's a good project to work on outside. So now that I'm on the foot and it's just knitting, and there's like no increases or decreases or anything happening. Not that there's ever really increases. It's always decreases with socks. As a matter of fact, when I got kicked out of the sewing room yesterday, I just went and got a glass of iced tea and my knitting bag and sat out there and worked on that for a few hours. But creativity, the creative mojo, it kind of comes and goes. And right now the knitting mojo has left the building. I'm sure it will be back. I often fall in love with sock knitting over the summer because, again, it's so portable and easy to do in vacations. So stay tuned for more knitting news at another point. Let's move on to what I've been reading, which in the past I've been in a little bit of a funk, but I did happen upon a book that I enjoyed very much. I went to a neighboring library and to drop off a book that I checked out for my son, and I'd forgotten what a beautiful library this is. It is at the absolute end of the street that I grew up on, and it makes me a little bit sad every time I go now that, like, oh my gosh, what if that library had been there when I was a kid? I would have lived there. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous library. And I love libraries. When my son was in an honor band and they had this rehearsal somewhere in LA, I spent the day just going from library to library just to find a place to work. And it's so fun to see other people's libraries. And sometimes they're very cute and small, and sometimes they're huge and gorgeous. But anyway, so I went to this library and they had a beautiful display of books that are recently released. And I came across the book called 2 Steps Forward by Graham Simpson and Anne, I want to say Buist, B-U-I-S-T. Graham Simpson is the person that wrote The Rosie Project, which was my beach read maybe 4 years ago. And it had gotten a lot of really good press, and I feel like I liked it. I didn't love it, but I can be really at the mercy of expectations. So if everyone is saying it's the best book ever, then I'm gonna, have high expectations. Eleanor Oliphant, that I talked about maybe last podcast, actually did live up to the hype. But anyway, so I enjoyed The Rosie Project. He had a follow-up called The Rosie Effect. I did not read that one, but this book is about 2 people who do the Camino de Santiago. I'm probably totally butchering that, but it captured my attention because the pastor of my church is doing the same Camino. So I had never heard of this before, but there's a big walk, like a pilgrimage that you can do that ends up in, I think, Santiago at this cathedral. I want to say it's St. Paul's. Gosh, I hope that's right. But anyways, people start from all over. The one that our pastor is doing starts in the French Pyrenees and goes down. It's 500 miles. It will take him 6 weeks. But I learned from reading this book that people do just different sections of it. They start from different places. There's lots of feeder trails that go into it. Lots of people do it for religious reasons, and lots of people do it just for their own spiritual reasons, not necessarily religious. And the characters in this book are doing it for very different reasons. And they're doing it at a very non-typical time of year, more starting in like February, so it's still pretty wintry. Our pastor did it starting in May, but it was still snowing in the French Pyrenees at the beginning of his walk. So there you go. So you can imagine if you start in February what it might be like. But anyways, I enjoyed it very much because it was a great story with it's a man and a woman who, again, are doing this walk for very different reasons. And the people, how they sort of intersect, the people that they meet, the types of challenges that happen on a long-term walk like this. So it was very interesting. So I highly recommend that. It definitely has put this Camino on my bucket list, which my husband would really be happy to hear, which he does know actually. But I would like to try one of these long walks. A friend of mine who's from England but lives here now, last summer did an England coast-to-coast walk, west to east, I believe it was, not north to south. And it took 2 weeks, and it was her and her husband and 2 teenagers. And what's kind of interesting is that you can walk from basically sort of from village to village, and you can hire someone to bring your luggage and drop it off at the next B&B. And she researched it and booked all the B&Bs separately, and she figured all that out. She hired the service to take their luggage. Apparently you can just kind of buy this as a whole package deal, but it's a little less expensive if you do it yourself. But that walk is the first time I'd ever really heard of doing one of these sort of long walks, and it really kind of made my husband say, we should do that sometime. So at first I was like, why would we do that? But now I realize that I think they're spending that much time without technology, just with your thoughts and with family. I think there are a lot of benefits to it, and I'm really interested in putting that on the bucket list. And now that our kids are older, I think it would be quite a bit easier. So I wonder if we'll get that scheduled in the next few years. I hope so. Last episode, I mentioned that Masterpiece did their own version of Little Women, and that it had come highly recommended, and I was going to check it out. And I finally did. It took me a while to get around to it. And I got to say that I loved it. My husband watched part of it with me, and at one point said, I'm finding this music really distracting. And so he actually Googled it, and other people had the same kind of feeling. Some of the music was definitely sort of not of that period. They were definitely going for evoking a feeling. Didn't really bother me, but it really... He kept bringing it up, so it really bothered him. It's definitely a different take on Little Women. I mean, not entirely. We all know the story. But in the same way, I don't know if you watched Anne with an E on Netflix, which was very good. It's again, another retelling of Anne of Green Gables, but it's a little bit darker than any other, adaptation of Anne of Green Gables that I've seen. And it made it all the more realistic. Number one, the casting on Anne. Sorry, I'm going to diverge into Anne of Green Gables for a second. The casting of Anne was amazing because she looked exactly the way Anne is supposed to look, which is not beautiful, if you know what I mean. And the one that Megan Fellows or whoever played Anne in the older versions, she's just a little too pretty to really be convincingly Anne. But it also delved into Anne's background, where, she's a 10 or 11-year-old orphan who has been in the system her whole life. Obviously, there's some bad things that happened, and so they kind of take you into that to make Anne basically a more sympathetic character. Well, with Little Women, it's kind of the same way, that it can be a little bit darker when you have the scenes of the Civil War and what Mr. March is going through. It's definitely darker. And just various scenes, things that are happening with Beth, it's all a little bit more realistic and therefore I think better, kind of a richer experience. And I think a good reason that they remade it. If you're just going to remake all the versions that have been done before, why bother? But the casting also was really good. Jo is played by Maya Hawk, who is the daughter of Uma Thurman and Ethan Hawke. And I just kept looking at her, seeing Uma Thurman. And you know how Uma Thurman has, I don't think that her daughter is quite as tall as an Uma Thurman, like 6 feet tall, but she has big features. She has long fingers and big eyes and a large mouth. And Maya kind of has those same features, and I just kept seeing her. And again, she was a very good Jo. She's not too beautiful, but very pleasant. And so the casting was really well done. So I definitely recommend the Masterpiece version of Little Women, which I think I said last time was done in 2 parts. It's actually 3 episodes. And I think they're all out now because we're members of PBS or whatever. I can kind of see them all immediately. But I have a feeling that the last one was released on Sunday. So definitely check that out if you are a Little Women fan. So to wrap up with the homemaking part of this podcast, I would like to confess that I've had no heart for really digging into homemaking inside the house right now. And I think that it's spring and the weather has just been leading me to kind of cultivate the outdoor living spaces. I told you recently we did a garden, and I should take some photos. I've mentioned that when I plant seeds, it's a bit of a leap of faith for me that those things are actually going to come up, but they really did. So I've got sunflowers that are not well over. So let's just say a foot tall right now. So that those are happening. I've got lettuce ready to be thinned, even a little more than I did on my first pass. The strawberries are spreading and sending out runners. The blackberries are doing well. So I've been really spending some time weeding and keeping that up. We added to our herb garden. I've got thyme, chives, and oregano that are perennials, and rosemary. So I just added some basil and some flowers to the little herb garden area, and I was able to go. I love to do this. We did grilled vegetables for a side dish yesterday for Memorial Day, and I can't tell you the thrill that I get out of just going out to the backyard with a little pair of kitchen snips and snipping some thyme and oregano and basil and rosemary and chopping those up and throwing them in the vegetables, and then going back out there for some chives for the baked potatoes. I just get such a thrill out of that. And it's so easy. Those herbs, you don't even want to over fertilize them. The herb garden is the easiest thing to plant and takes the least amount of tending, but is so useful. And I am not so good necessarily about always using up the vegetables from our vegetable garden, but I love the herbs. And I've continued to do a bunch of weeding out there. I kind of forgotten what a workout real gardening could be. So I'm just digging plants out and weeding, fertilizing. I dragged 8 big 20-pound bags of mulch to the yard and mulched the whole thing, so I was a big sweaty mess at the end, but felt like it was better than any gym workout that I ever had. So that's actually been pretty fun. So I'm enjoying spring. I'm looking forward to summer. I've been so inspired by gardening. I'm pinning all these garden inspiration posts on my Pinterest board. And then I just decided to do one the other day. They had it's like a little bee watering station for bees and butterflies who you want, to attract to your yard. So it's just an upside down terracotta pot with a saucer on top. Just you put a few stones in the little saucer and fill it up with water so that bees and butterflies can kind of stand on the stone and still drink water. It took 5 minutes to dig around and wash up an old terracotta pot. So that was really fun, and it was something I found on Pinterest. I've also been pinning salads and main dish salads like mad for spring and summertime, dinner inspiration. In the winter, I like to make soup at least once a week as our dinner. And in the summer, I like to do a main dish salad at least once or twice a week to just keep things light, keep the oven turned off where it's getting hot. So those are the kinds of things that I'm sort of anticipating. And I actually also, since I've been making lots of visits to the garden center, I bought a couple of houseplants, which for me is kind of a big deal. I fell out of love with houseplants I don't know, 15 years ago or something, when I just had a series of plants, the water overflow and ruin carpets, and just having them die. And so I just went completely fake plants for years. And now I'm just sick of fake plants, and I just want natural things in the house. I like the fact that they clean the air for you. So I'm slowly introducing more real plants into the house. Over spring break, when I started kind of, redoing the potted plants on the patio in the porch, I got a couple of orchids that are on our mantle, and that's been nice. That was like my first little step in there. Though that's been a couple months now, and the blossoms are starting to drop, and I've never ever been able to get an orchid to rebloom. So they may just be sort of temporary plants that last me a couple months. Orchids are not expensive if you get them at Trader Joe's, and I do love them so. But I think I might move this one to a different area, the one that's really dropping its blooms, and try to fertilize it and see if I can get it to rebloom. But I've also bought a fern for the bathroom, and I don't know, a philodendron or something, very generic looking houseplant for the family room. And I'm going to see if I can find the types of houseplants that thrive in very low light, because I don't have a lot of big windows of light inside the house. It doesn't seem like a dark house, but it's not enough to keep a lot of plants alive. So I'm kind of excited about that, and introducing a little bit more green. I've taken away a lot of our decor inside the house over the years and been a little bit more minimalistic, and I really want to kind of just introduce that green natural effect as well. That about wraps up this episode. Again, thank you so much for just spending this time, with me, letting me chat at you. And if you enjoy the podcast, I encourage you to head over to iTunes and leave a review or a rating. Very much appreciated, and it really helps it come up when people are searching for podcasts to listen to. So I really appreciate that. And I hope that you are enjoying this transition of spring into summer, and that you are finding joy in being outside and enjoying the weather, and have